is really hard. Plus, there's no pictures in this book. I think it's very, very rude, actually. No pictures, not even a musical example.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to OSA Backstage. I'm Dani Meyer, VP of Artistic and a section bassist with the Omaha Symphony. This is a podcast about, well, it's not about my cats, but it is about the bits and pieces you don't see that make up a symphony orchestra, co-hosted by my partner in crime, Sauce Boss, but also Serena Royton, assistant conductor, and a variety of guests who love this orchestra on stage and off. This is episode 1, Old and New Friends, with Alasdair, Neale, and Oliver Herbert. For our friends not watching video, I'll insert their introductions here.
My name is Alasdair Neale. I'm the conductor for this week's concerts, and I'm very much looking forward to being back with the Omaha Symphony.
My name is Oliver Herbert. I'm a cellist originally from San Francisco, California, and really looking forward to being in Omaha for the first time and meeting you all in the hall.
These guys are so good at having lovely. These guys are so good at having a lovely conversation. We talk about what it's like to grow up surrounded by musicians, what Alasdair calls music in the furniture, 700-page biographies on Ravel, taking space to enjoy creation, and what's going on in the wings when the lights dim before that very first orchestra tune. Next time we record on Zoom, by the way, I'll make sure that you get the gallery view to watch all of Serena's reactions. You'll just have to imagine some pretty delighted agreement during all of the good parts. We're so glad you're here. And so is Sauce. And now, episode 1, Old and New Friends. We are absolutely delighted that you two are coming to Omaha and working together. And as we were getting to know more about you, your family traditions. Alasdair, I love that quote that music was in the furniture at your house. I'm genuinely curious, was there an option B for either of you? Or was it just clear from the get-go that music was eventually going to be what you did?
I guess I'll go first. It was not necessarily always clear for me until my teens. I never really was the kind of person to plan that far ahead. I loved what I was doing in front of me. Looking back, I mean, the fact that music was all-consuming in so many different ways, as whether it was flute or cello or composition or studying form and analysis and all of these things, you would have thought the amount of time that I spent with it, that it would have been the obvious thing. But I never really gave any serious thought until I joined the National Youth Orchestra of Great Britain when I was 15. And there I had an aha moment when I realized, oh, there's just no question of it at this point. This is going to be my life. How about you, Oliver?
Oh, yeah. Well, for me, I think that it sort of subtly transformed from something that I just enjoyed doing and was always part of my life, because both my parents and also my grandparents and my whole family, basically they're all musicians, and I was always playing an instrument from a very young age, whether it was violin, with my mom, who was my first teacher in a way, or my piano with my grandparents, very much in the family, but without much expectation or like pressure that I would necessarily become professional. But then I think at around 12, 13, 14, by that point, I just fallen so in love with it. And I think also because the cello is the instrument that I picked when I was around 7, and discovering a lot of pieces for the cello, especially things that weren't maybe played so often and pieces that I really loved. And kind of as I got more passionate about it, it sort of became my life, and also, therefore my profession and all of that. So I can't really remember when I decided, but I feel lucky that it sort of happened without much, without having to think about it too much in a way.
Well, but you both just said two things. Alasdair, you said you were already studying form and structure. You were already deep diving scores even before you joined that orchestra. And Oliver, you've said in the past that you were essentially babysat by the San Francisco Symphony. And by 12 or 13, you were thinking, oh, I could do this professionally,
Mm.
or maybe I should. Serena, I don't know how your trajectory, because Serena is a flute player. Alasdair, you're a former flute player and cellist, and Oliver, you're of course a cellist. I'm feeling very outnumbered here as a bass player. But it didn't occur to me that to even think about bass as a profession until I was on the verge of college. So I'm genuinely curious. Was it your parents? Alasdair, was it that experience conducting as a 16-year-old? Like, what made you think career? Career is such a adult switch to turn on in my mind.
Well, yeah, to be honest, for me, it's still like that subject of career is still an ongoing topic that I wrestle with and think about, especially, the more time that goes on and the more, I'm 27 now. So, I mean, I've been playing in a way professionally for over 10 years, technically. So it's been more than a decade, but I would say in many ways, I'm just now starting to understand, that the transition, that at a certain point, the decision making and the prioritization of certain things, and okay, what do I want my life and music to mean? What kinds of projects do I want to do? What's important to me? I think like those sorts of questions are starting to define the career aspect. But in terms of making music regularly, that kind of just happened out of like a curiosity and a drive and ambition to do it. And at a certain point, I was very lucky that some people offered to pay me to do it. And then, one thing led to another. And so it's all part of a process, I think, for me. And wasn't so much like, now I'm a professional. Now this is my career. Yeah, because I think Alasdair would probably agree that it's all of us are also in any artistic profession, I guess really any field where you're passionate about it, it's like we're always learning too, so it's yeah.
That's for sure. The learning never stops. And the more one learns, the more one realizes how little one knows. So there's the eternal challenge of trying to educate oneself. Obviously, I'm at a different stage of my career than Oliver. I, for the most part, it's just been for me a kind of falling gradually from one phase into another without a whole lot of planning in advance. Maybe I am a good Californian at heart because I sort of tended to go with the flow. And the biggest, I think the now that I think about it, and I really haven't thought about it in these terms, but the closest I've been to any kind of rupture and a real sudden and drastic move was the decision to move to Paris a few years ago, because that up until that point I had been juggling since 2019 three different orchestras: the Sun Valley Music Festival, of which I'm still music director, but at the time also the Marin Symphony in California, near San Francisco, where I was based, and also the New Haven Symphony. And the decision basically to move to Paris, where I'm not specifically and intentionally not working year round, was much more drastic than any other, I think, decision that I've had before, where everything felt that it was just sort of coming along at the right time at the right place, and it's brought me a lot of happiness.
That's fantastic. Do you find, what does this time give you when you're not dividing your focus between three orchestras at the same time? What does that give you?
Well, it gives me a lot more breathing room. I was able to, I will say, that I could manage to juggle all of these three orchestras, perhaps only because I had, going back to the beginning of the conversation, started doing all of this when I was about 11 and 12. That's when I started building my repertoire, and particularly when you do a lot of intensive study at that age, pieces stick with you. So I was able to draw on a pretty decent wealth of experience with juggling these three orchestras. But what I have now is time to read. I've got a big book on the table there, about this thick, 700 pages, a biography of Ravel, because there's a big centenary year, of course, the 150th anniversary of his birth coming up in a month's time, and I'm able to read it, and it's doubly hard because it's in French. So it's humbling, because I mean, I think my French is good. I mean, I'm not going to, sort of play myself down. I speak reasonably fluently, but reading a intensely academic biography in French is really hard. Plus, there's no pictures in this book. I think it's very, very rude, actually. No pictures, not even a musical example.
You would
Anyway,
think Ravel would have done some cartoons or something. Would have had like a sketchbook somewhere. He was a oh, 700 pages on Ravel. So clearly you're still studying, even if you're not studying three orchestras worth of scores. You're still devoting.
that's right.
Okay,
That's right.
but let's 11 or 12, and you're already deep dive studying. Who was that? You? Was that your family? Was that just curiosity? What at age 11? Okay, now to be fair, I know like dinosaurs, cars, rocket ships, the planets, like everybody picks one and goes whole ham on it. Was music for you then? Was that the whole ham gonna deep dive this?
Would have had to have been for me. Yeah, I mean, there's not much else I could do. I
Oh,
certainly couldn't. I couldn't throw a ball in any given direction, or velocity. So that was out, and I hated it. So yeah, I gave no thought to it. It just seemed natural. It's just what I love to do with my time, and I had various interests. Um, yeah, for me, I don't know about for you, Oliver.
Um, well, I can relate to that in a way because, but I think for me, it was also specifically the cello that I had found something that, like, I was more reserved as a kid, for sure, than I am now. Um, and I feel like the cello allowed me to sort of find my own voice and express myself. And I think I was very lucky that I was very supported in it as well, like appreciated for the fact that I could do that. And so it kind of, the environment that I was in coinciding with that, finding that passion for myself, like it sort of worked pretty harmoniously. Um, so I think, yeah, I think I was very lucky actually for in that sense with it.
that's
I think,
phenomenal, Serena.
yeah, so I have this similar trajectory, I think, to Dani, where I came to music quite a bit later. I didn't even realize it could be a career until I met, I think, other peers who were more like Oliver and Alasdair, who grew up with music and had already, it was just never really a thought to them that they shouldn't pursue music as a career. So I think there was a lot of doubt and maybe a lot of also thinking of backup options,
Mm.
talking to within a family that's not musical, right? To kind of navigating that. So I'm wondering, was there any doubt throughout your career up until this point, before when you were still a teenager, before your studies, did you ever think of what you would do out if you
Mm.
didn't go into music? Was there kind of any sort of, or was this always kind of your focus?
Well, I have um, one thing to share about that, which is that question of what I would do otherwise, I think kind of crystallized for me during the pandemic for the first time. Because during the pandemic, when everything stopped, I kind of put the cello down for a while and paused and just sort of, I didn't feel any pressure to do anything necessarily. And I think because my life as a musician, it's so intense and it's like always the next thing, and ambition and all of that, and wanting to create things. And so it felt good to kind of stop playing for a while. And then I was really surprised that what happened when I did that was that all of a sudden, a lot of aspects of my creativity that maybe were dormant started to kind of pop up. So I got really into stop motion animation. I was taking a lot of photography, like a lot of visual art stuff and film stuff, and combining that also with my music. And I felt kind of like getting back in touch with that childhood creativity that sort of went beyond just playing the cello. And that was really a beautiful experience for me, because it sort of, I think up until the pandemic, because I always had music as like the main thing, and I didn't really consider anything else. I didn't really want to look at that, actually. Like that was kind of like a shadow, you know, what if not for the, I always questioned, well, if I didn't have this, if I couldn't play, who would I be? You know, is my whole existence defined by the fact that I played the cello? Like that was kind of like a demon that I was living with, maybe a little bit, even if I wasn't super aware of it. And then, so then in the pandemic, when all of this happened, I thought, I realized that, oh, actually, who I am and my creative being goes much further than music. And I mean, I'm very grateful to play the cello, and I love it, and I devote myself to that, and I believe in that. But it kind of gave me a comfort within myself, you know. So yeah, but I never really questioned it up until that point, because it was just so full on focused. And I think especially trying to, you know, devote myself also to doing solo playing and things like that, it's like really, you have to kind of have a sort of tunnel vision in a way, and like, yeah, convince yourself that, you know, it's possible. And what you said too about your experience, I certainly also had a lot of colleagues, even for instance at Curtis Institute, which is, all of the players are so amazing, like highest level, you know, and a lot of people even there in undergrad, they were asking themselves the same question, because they came from a family where it wasn't necessarily normal that music could be considered a professional thing. And I watched how much actually that was a big barrier for them. So yeah, I think it's like always a mental game too.
It's not really doubt then. It's just you like you said, tunnel vision. You took away space for you to consider other things, and it wasn't until you literally had to acknowledge that there was space for an indeterminate amount of time that you could start entertaining things. And even then, I love the fact that you were able to pursue things that bring you joy, that make you happy, and still return to the cello though as your, no, I still love this. This is still the direction I want to go in for right now. You know, and Alasdair, meanwhile, you're at a totally different point where you are picking and choosing the things that you want to do, and you're essentially giving yourself time to be happy outside of it. So as the tunnel vision, did you ever find that tunnel vision was true for you?
It's a good question. I mean, I to a certain extent, I think as a conductor, you have to have a wide body of knowledge, but also very, very detailed. So the score study never stops. Serena, you know this, of course, intimately. Even with both works that I've conducted a number of times coming up in Omaha, both the Dvorak Concerto and the Elgar First Symphony, there are so many things, even just with two scores, let alone 20 or 200, how many are in your repertoire, that are constantly being reevaluated. And so maybe I don't have the same tunnel vision, but I'm able to drill down even more intently on the works that I do conduct, because I'm just not doing as much.
When you're revisiting, okay, so talk about that revisiting. Are you, and Oliver, this is for you also. These are old friends for both of you, Elgar and Dvorak. But every time you return to a piece, how are you approaching it? Is it a review to start? Are you starting from scratch? I know that whenever I had an audition, actually one of my favorite things was kind of going back to almost a completely blank page, the slowest possible tempo to start. I'm gonna tear the thing apart down to its studs, and I'm gonna put it back together again, even if I just finished a previous audition. Does it feel similarly? How do you start?
Oliver, you want to go first, or I'm happy to?
Yeah. Well, yeah. You know what I've been thinking, like specifically for bringing back, you know, the Dvorak for our concert. something that I find really interesting is that I feel how, every time between playing this piece, maybe I, learn another piece in the meantime, or I'm working on certain things, or I'm focusing on other repertoire. And it's interesting to see how that focus ends up informing or changing my approach, or also like the way that I relate to myself playing the Dvorak concerto physically. For instance, in the last year, I took on a really big challenge with like a new piece of repertoire, the first cello concerto by Schnittke, which is basically on the scale of a Mahler symphony for cello and orchestra, and super physical, and demands a sort of physical approach where you train the confidence that's needed in order to play this piece and to kind of handle it. And like on the most basic terms, like that translates to having a lot of comfort and very like high positions on the cello all the time, and shifting up to those notes that are in the, in other regions of the instrument with like total security and confidence. And so I feel, okay, after I learned that Schnittke concerto, actually certain things in the Dvorak I have a map for it in a more clear way in my head. But at the same time, it's also interesting because there's a lot of muscle memory, like with pieces that you played many times. So you're sort of in dialogue with previous versions of yourself. And you just try to, I think it's a privileged to get to revisit things and try to make it better each time. And that's part of the fun. I don't know.
I love that idea of being in a dialogue with a previous self.
That's exactly what I was going to pick up on, because I had a little of that this morning. I did something working on the Elgar this morning. I did something that I generally don't do at all. And it's part of a very haphazard process for me of reacquainting myself. Sometimes with a score, I'll sit down, and sometimes I sit at the piano and bash out a few notes just to slow things down. Sometimes I'll just walk through, I'll read through the score and play it in my head in real time. But this morning, I actually sat down and listened to the only recording I have of myself doing it, which was taken the live performance in Sun Valley 2.5 years ago. And I usually don't listen to recordings, because it's like I'm like one of those actors that can't stand to watch themselves on screen. It's a little bit like that for me, so particularly that there's very little evidence of me, video evidence of me conducting, that I think I probably hate that even more. But even to go back and listen to my own performances, all I hear is things that don't go right, or that I'm not happy with. So that's the dialogue that went on this morning. I listened to the symphony the whole way through, and some stuff was pretty good, and some stuff I realized even in the last 2 years, I've rethought that element. And a couple of things I thought, well, I like that, but God, how did I do that physically with this beating pattern? And I thought, it sounds pretty good, but I'm not sure, did I subdivide that or not? And now I'm starting to second guess myself. So who knows what it's going to be like in a couple of weeks' time.
Oh, that's fantastic. Do you rehearse it both ways? Like if you have that moment, because I feel like we've all had it. I don't know I don't know what fingering I used. I don't know what bowing I used. Or you look at old fingerings. You're like, that's insanity. Why on earth would I choose to do it that way? So do you do it multiple ways, and that way in rehearsal you can be flexible?
I think I know my technique well enough. I have enough tricks, and sort of my bag of tricks has enough things in it that I can figure out on the spur of the moment if I need to subdivide or not. And also it kind of depends sometimes on the comfort level from the orchestra. I often find myself, because I like pretty open, I don't like particularly top-down approach to conducting, so I like to think of it as a dialogue between the conductor and orchestra. I often say to an orchestra, what works for you? Would you want me to subdivide here? Do you want an extra beat? And sometimes it's like, no, we're fine. Sometimes, yes, please. And sometimes, I don't know, I don't care. I don't
Yeah,
know.
that's
What did you with fingerings and bowings, Oliver? Do you find yourself
Mm.
changing on the spur of the moment?
Well,
please
I
not
think
spur of the
so
moment.
much you sort of have to be ready and open for anything, knowing that also, for instance, like I'm really looking forward. One of the things that I've heard about Omaha is that the hall is really wonderful. And so I'm really looking forward to being in that space and seeing what that space requires, and also, yeah, the Dvorak, I think, is also particularly, it's like chamber music at a symphonic level, um, more than most pieces, maybe. So a lot is determined by sort of the feedback from the orchestra and like trying to, play, just make music with members of the orchestra, especially in the wind section. So it's, yeah, you try to train yourself to be open and versatile and like have possibilities.
That's and I wanted to ask you how much you can actually prepare before you hear the orchestra for the first time, before you set foot on stage. But it sounds like essentially you're both getting yourself to a place where no matter what, you can pivot. But between the two of you, so obviously the orchestra is in this huge dance party. The orchestra is a massive part of it, right? But between the two of you, you have to be on the same page. So who the phrase is wrong, but who wins when you walk into a conductor soloist meeting? Who
The
wins?
I think it
yeah,
ought to be an honorable draw.
yeah, probably our response is like, I would say that he wins, he would say that I win. uh,
Yeah.
yeah, no, but actually, um, well, I don't know if you all know this, but the first time that I ever played the Dvorak concerto was with Alasdair, and so as a cellist, that's very special, to because it's such an important piece for us, and so I think, and actually, my first Elgar concerto was also with Alasdair. So he's been very important in terms of my development, and also, but by the time that we did those on those occasions, Alasdair had done the pieces probably dozens of times, and so I think I was bringing my approach, but also I try to be very receptive and just yeah, have strong convictions, have a very very strong idea of what the ideals are, but then every collaboration, I think once you're there, it's you sort of have to like set the ego aside and think, okay, how can we all together make this the best that it can be in this moment, and yeah, so I don't know, Alasdair, what do you what do you think?
Yes, I think absolutely. I agree with everything that you said. And for us doing the Dvorak concerto and the Elgar, for me to be on the podium the first time you were doing these two pieces were very, very special for me, because some of you may not know, but I've known Oliver since he was about 3. And my first, Oliver, I hope you won't, this is not going to embarrass you, I don't think, but I mean, I'll tell the
Okay.
story that my first memories of Oliver were seeing him as a 3-year-old up at the festival in Sun Valley in Idaho, where at the time both of his parents played in the orchestra. And he would sit on his own in about the third row of the audience throughout a 2.5-hour rehearsal, very still and quiet, and just taking everything in. And I figured out who he was at a certain part. It was obvious. And this little boy, just very super aware and sensitive to what was going around him. And I thought, well, I'm going to file that away for future reference, because that's not an average 3-year-old. So having known him over the years and seen him go up and become this incredible musician, I felt it was very, very special to have been on the podium, as I say, for these two standard bearer cello concertos for the very first time. And it was just easy. I think only a really bad musician or a bad conductor would say there's only one way to do this piece. Part of the problem that I find when I'm exploring all of these scores time and time again is that's well, which option is going to be on the table today? I can't go to an orchestra and say, well, I don't know, what tempo do you think it should go at? You have to at a certain point just make the decision. But the thing about a concerto in particular is that I may feel certain tempos a little microscopically different from Oliver, or certain turns of phrase differently. But it's, he's the one that's really the voice, principal voice in everything. And as long as it's convincing, I don't see any reason for me to micromanage or get in the way. I just my job is to be sort of, as best I can, like a silk glove. And Oliver is really the hand that moves the piece forward.
I love that so much. Okay, when you first did the Dvorak together, one, do you remember when that was? How long was that?
But we're nodding ruefully because this was, I think it was March 5th, 2020, which was about 5 days before lockdown. It was the very last thing that I ever did before all hell broke loose. So yes, I remember it well.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so let's set aside everything happening outside the concert hall. Oliver, for your first performance of the Dvorak, what surprised you?
Oh, yeah. So it surprised me just how much is demanded in terms of presence from the soloist in that piece. Like, because you learn the piece, and you practice, and you're playing, and of course you think about making a big enough sound for the hall, all of those things. But then somehow, like, just the power of that piece when with the orchestra there, it's like one of those feelings where it's like, okay, now it's time to rise to the occasion. It's like I couldn't have anticipated what it demands. But it's such an amazing piece of art, and overall piece of art and overall narrative of a piece. So it's I really
coda. Did you get to that coda and think, I need a Gatorade or a sports drink or an IV or something?
Well, I think actually it's just that, like, maybe one specific thing is that, for instance, one of the challenges of the piece is it just takes experience to know, in the softer music or in the more intimate expressions, there's a degree in which certain moments allow you to, like, really bring the audience in. But then there's also a lot of music that the orchestration is quite dense. And so, of course, that's everybody in the orchestra ideally knows, and certainly the conductor, and we're all managing that. But at the same time, like, it was a surprise to me that sort of it's a piece that needs to be carried and lifted up, by the soloist. It just takes a lot of support. Like, I guess translating to, if it were a work for a singer, you need a good support to carry it all the way through. And I think there's some kind of parallel with the approach to the cello in that piece. And it's it just surprised me also that it's a piece that kind of takes it's a journey, so it takes you away, and it's a pleasure to sort of be part of that.
On the podium side of that, not just even your first performance at the Dvorak with Oliver, Alasdair, but how did you, possibly your first conducting a concerto performance ever, what came out of that? Because it suddenly becomes, I imagine, if you feel like you're holding something very precious and very fragile, you're in charge of. So how do you approach that?
I think listening is key. You have to, you're doing two things at the same time, is listening to the soloist and anticipating their needs, and also making sure that the orchestra is with you in the moment. Because if you listen too carefully and react, then the orchestra will be behind you, and that it gets messy. So you have to be in a certain way clairvoyant. But it also helps having a dialogue. I mean, I love working with soloists, and nowhere more so where I feel that we're reading each other's minds. And sometimes, often it happens. Sometimes it doesn't, and that's very hard. If you're dealing with somebody that's just not giving you the signals, then if the communication is only one way, it makes it hard because you can't anticipate so effectively. But yeah, and there's also something that, as with all things conductor related, that it comes with experience. Serena, I know you were probably at the earlier stages. I don't know how much concerto experience you've had, whether that how that's struck you so far in your career.
It's funny because the concerto experience I've had at Omaha specifically so far has been with students, which I think is a very, very different experience because they're doing unintentionally, they are not giving you signals. They don't have, there are a lot of external factors that are affecting their playing and all that. So it's been very interesting, kind of gently leading while giving them space. And then again, also that flexibility of maybe that flexibility isn't for a musical decision that they're consciously making in the moment, but a musical decision that is happening because of whatever other factor is influencing their playing at that time, their nerves, their whatnot, they missed a line in their music and all that. So that's kind of been my experience. It's a little bit different. It's certainly not what we're discussing here, but it's
a spontaneous bowing or fingering.
Yes, because they ran out of bow, or or they're taking a much faster tempo because of nerves, and that's a little tripping. But it's been very good, and I hope that experience, or I know that will inform and make all the subsequent soloist interactions easier, I hope.
Do you think the line, when you talk about a line of communication being closed, and we're not talking, students obviously are it's like, patting your head and rubbing your stomach at the same time, right? They're still learning how to have control of their body and listen and play all at the same time. But if it's a professional and that line of communication is closed, what do you think on either sides of the podium, by the way? It's like as a soloist with a conductor, as a conductor with a soloist. Why do you think that's happening? Is it because they're still in their head? Is it because the piece difficulty? Does it totally depend on the night, the situation? All of the above?
Probably all of the above. Yeah, I think it is on a case-by-case basis. And I should say that's very much the exception rather than the rule. I've been lucky to work with a certain level of soloists, and you really can't be a closed book and expect to get that far if you're not prepared to show and to give. There's no point in working with somebody if that's the case. But as I say, it's really happens very, very rarely.
Yeah, probably one of the most important variables in making music is, like, sounds simplistic, but really caring about what you're doing and loving what you're doing. And you can be at a different level of experience, of skill, but if you have that, usually that's something that another musician will be able to empathize with and then hop on board and know, okay, well, here I need to support. Here I know what they're going for. I can, having that sort of dialogue. But probably I think in my experience, the only issue is when somebody, like, maybe doesn't necessarily care that much. Other than that, I think there's usually a lot that you can work with. Or even if somebody doesn't care, to try to inspire them in some way,
Empathy is absolutely key. I love that you can do all the prep in the world, and all the score study and all the work in advance, and if you're not empathetic and listening on stage and open to that, it's still not going to feel very good. Which leads me though to my next question. Those 5 minutes, 5 seconds before you walk out on stage, the rest of the orchestra is already out there. We are ready. We're warmed up. We're ready to go. I know some European orchestras, they walk on stage together, so there's that collective. But American orchestras tend to start on stage until the conductor walks onto the podium. You guys don't have that luxury to kind of already be out there and stretching yourselves out and doing it. So as you're waiting in the wings, as you're on deck, what are you doing?
Well, for me, usually I'm actually quite like to be, well, I try to warm up and be like, physically ready. And then I usually, in a way, like to be kind of around people, like whether it be, the administration, the people working in the backstage, whatever else, like just to sort of, not necessarily socializing, but I like to kind of, I guess I'm usually thinking about, okay, well, this is a great thing that we're doing. We're all just people here around the music. There's going to be people in the audience that want to have this experience, all together, and to sort of like, maybe it's a way to sort of normalize the situation in my, or put it into a context of my personal feeling and like approach towards music, which is just that, we're all here for the same thing. And then it kind of makes it less about me.
Like directing your attention outwards.
Yes. So it's like very focused. I know that I have what my job is, but kind of also the mental equalization of things, so that I feel like I'm part of everything and not isolating myself from everybody else. That's important for me.
How about you?
Yeah, it kind of depends. For me, it depends on the context. If it's, I'm often sort of rifling through the pages of my score just to remind me of a few details. And if I'm doing something from memory, then it's just the final checklist to be absolutely sure, particularly if there's a meter change involved. It's like, just be really, really sure to turn right at this point. And if I'm just waiting in the wings, well, if it's a concerto, I'm focused on the soloist and trying to take my social cues from them. If they are happy to chat beforehand, then I'll exchange a few words. And if I see that they need to be in a quiet space, then I'll sort of back away and not and give them the space. So I want to be sensitive to that. And then a few seconds beforehand, particularly depending on the beginning of the piece, but if it's a tricky beginning, I'm reminding myself of the tempo. So I don't walk out and turn and go, now how does this piece start again? No, wait, I've got it. Just give me a second. It'll come to me. You've got to put yourself in the mood of the very opening, one way or another. Even if it's something like the Tchaikovsky Pathetique Symphony, which is, starts with no pulse at all, just this deathly soft open fifth in the basses. In a certain way, I've got to gear myself up for that state of mind just before I go on.
So with the soloist, empathy, for both of you, empathy is still going, where you're cluing into what's happening outside of you and you're reacting from there. And then beyond that, it's those tiny last little details that I think as human beings we're always concerned that, like, if you don't have a list, they're going to disappear on you forever.
Serena, Oh, sorry, no, I don't mean to interrupt, but I also just wanted to add one little thing, which is like what I was describing also, I think is specifically for the Dvorak concerto, actually, because the main aspect of that piece, which everybody will see, is that the first thing I need to do is sit on stage for like 3.5 minutes while the orchestra plays the tutti. And that is a very particular experience, to sort of be there for that and then to enter, as opposed to, with Alasdair that he has to come out and like start it, So there's different, I think probably, yeah, every piece is going to be a little different in that way. Or if I'm playing a piece by Shostakovich, for instance, this last summer, I was working a lot on the 8th string quartet and really trying to immerse myself in the context in which that piece was written, the context that that piece fits into the narrative of the composer's life. And it's really, really like, it's really meaningful and really intense and really, I don't know, hard to describe. So in that sense, I was like fully in that zone, like almost method actor, like trying to really put myself there, hoping that when we played the piece, it would feel like it wouldn't just be, okay, we're playing Shostakovich String Quartet for you all. Look at this great piece, look at this great performance, but oh, can we open up the world of what this piece is trying to say? So that's, yeah. But the Dvorak, I need to feel sort of like calm and collected so that I can sit there and be inspired by what I hear and then kind of respond with my own voice,
It's a good thing that as a 3-year-old, you were already very good at sitting quietly and listening. You already had that down.
I can attest to that. Yeah.
Yeah, I was good at it, but also I think, that was kind of the deal with my parents too at the same time. Or like, yeah, like my, with my dad, it was like, okay, Oliver, like he always treated me in a way, he treated me like an adult from when I was really little. It's like, of course you can sit there, and kind of, I was just okay with it. I wasn't gonna, talk back. But yeah, it's funny to look back and think back to those experiences because I think all of that musical inspiration was happening. I mean, I think I was very perceptive, that's true, but the inspiration was very subconscious. Like, I think it still feeds back to me now. Like now I'm very grateful for it. But at the time, it was sort of just what it was. And I was trying to be behaved as a kid, yeah.
Well, and you both are being very kind and very generous with your time, so I don't want to take up too much more of it. But when we're this Elgar, this whole program is a delight. But the Elgar is totally new to Omaha. I don't think we've played it, Alasdair, especially not before 1990. It's been a long time, and we're going to ask, we ask classical audiences to come in and essentially be our best Oliver Herberts and to just sit and let this happen. And it's hard, I imagine, it's like when you start a new book and it's a great work of fiction, but you have no idea where it's going. It's scary. That is a scary prospect to take on, that you don't know where the story is going. And so, Alasdair, for the Elgar, that's where we are. The orchestra will have had the music for at least 2 weeks. We'll have prepared with you the entire cycle, so we at least have it in, within ourselves by the time the performances happen. But the audiences might not. So how do you set up? What would you say to our audiences who are going to give us their best Oliver Herbert and let this Elgar happen?
First, and I don't want to sort of usurp the role of Omaha Symphony historian, but I actually do think that the orchestra has done it in the past. And the reason I know this is one of my best friends, conductor, we were college roommates at Yale, David Hagee, was music director of the Omaha area youth orchestras in the 1970s and studied with Tom Berchetti. And he absolutely remembers, of course, that was your music director at the time, and he remembers Tom doing the Elgar First Symphony, but this probably would have been in the region of 1978 to 1980.
Okay.
So that it's a
Great.
long,
so
long time ago.
First time. Yeah.
Well, as far as I can tell, it's not the first time, but in practical terms, yes, for the audience, maybe there were some people that were around going to and even in the orchestra or the audience in 1978, but to all intents and purposes, it's a brand new piece. I would say just keep your ears open and your heart open. The musical language, which is often the hardest barrier, the toughest nut to crack for an audience in terms of understanding a piece. The musical language is very, very familiar. It's late Romantic. It's tonal. There are beautiful melodies at the very beginning. This is just melody, very quiet, noble march that goes on forever in the sense that it just sort of feeds off itself. It covers a wide range of emotions, and it will take you there. It's longer than some symphonies. It's about 50 minutes. And above all, focus on this incredible slow movement that's one of the great adagios of the symphonic repertoire. And it doesn't, I mean, it's cool to know that the melody in the slow movement is the same will-o'-the-wisp frantic melody that opens the scherzo. The notes are exactly the same, but it's slowed down by about 50-fold. So it's exactly the same notes. You don't need to know that because you can listen to the scherzo as this crackling, energetic will-o'-the-wisp, as I say, piece, and the slow movement, which flows directly out of the scherzo, as this incredibly noble Beethovenian, beautiful, exalted music. They're drawn from the same fount, which is the same font, which is pretty extraordinary. And it has a wonderful, happy ending. And just it's our job to take everybody along for the ride. But in terms of trying to understand the musical language, I think it's if you know the Enigma Variations, you know the Cello Concerto, you know Land of Hope and Glory. It's all kind of from that same stream.
So it's really it is, at the end of the day, every concert is a trust exercise. It is being willing to be open, to have a dialogue, not just between the people who are on stage, but the people who are in the hall and on stage, essentially having that dialogue as well. And then just being open to something that you might not know and would grow to love. Gentlemen, this was so much fun. Thank you for spending this time with us. Any last thoughts, anyone?
I'm certainly looking forward to coming back to Omaha. It's been so long, I can't even remember the last time I conducted the orchestra. It must be at least 20 years. But I'm looking forward to seeing the new hall, and doing this wonderful repertoire, which probably, as you mentioned, most of the orchestra hasn't seen in terms of the Alto Cello Concerto, and with the Dvorak to see and work with my dear friend Oliver once again. I'm really looking forward to that. That's going to be a treat for me.
And Oliver, you have ties, by the way, to the Omaha Conservatory, which I don't want to forget, because your mom she taught at Soundwaves, right?
Yes, I don't know this. Not too familiar with this like specific names of the programs, but my mom has taught in Omaha many times with Ruth Meintz. And this is also somebody that I know from growing up going to Suzuki string camps in Topeka, Kansas. My family is actually my parents were born in the Midwest, so my mom is from Kansas and my dad is from Missouri, and so so I've never been to Omaha, so I'm really looking forward to that. But I have sort of roots in certain, mostly in Kansas, so it's going to be interesting to see what other connections pop up, and who I'm really looking forward to meeting everybody there and all of the musicians. And this has certainly been a great conversation, so thank you.
Indeed.
I think the best concerts make the world seem a little smaller, and so looking forward to having you both. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.